Hi, I'm Chuck Gibson. This is Loveland Beacon Talks. Silent films have been a fascination for our guest today for more than 40 years. He has an amazing story of bringing history to life with silent films. He lives right here in Loveland, Ohio. It is my pleasure to welcome Joe Harvat to Loveland Beacon Talks. So Joe Harvat with us today here on Loveland Beacon. Thank you so much for joining us.
You are so very welcome.
And today on Loveland Beacon Talks, folks, Joe lives right here in Loveland, and he's going to talk to us about, of all things, silent film, but silent film restoration. But I'm going to start with this, Joe. So who is Joe Harvat?
Well, I have been living in the Cincinnati area since about 1990, originally from Northeast Ohio, and graduated from the University of Akron. My degree is in communications mass media. Somewhere along the way, I started off in radio and television.
Like I say, you could be sitting on this side of the microphone right now.
I have a time or two in another life.
Right.
But at some point during that time, back in the 80s, I got into information technology, found out I had a knack for computer programming, wow, and switched from media to IT, and spent 38 years in IT, and retired in 2021, and I have been retired from GE Aviation since that time.
Okay. Well, and that helps make sense out of the restoration of silent film. So that, folks, gives us a good idea who Joe Harvat is and what your background is. Tell us a little bit about, tell us a lot, actually, about the silent film and what you're doing with silent films and where that all comes from for you.
It seems like my entire life, even from when I was a child, I remember silent movies being around. In my very early life as a kid, I remember them being on the children's shows that I would watch on in Cleveland.
Charlie Chaplin.
Right.
Yeah.
They would show them as comedy features. But I think seriously, I got seriously interested when I was in college. Yeah. As part of the curriculum, they had several film classes, and several were film history. Yeah. And, of course, anytime one of those things starts, they start off at the beginning, and that was the silent era. Up until 1927 or so, every movie that was made was silent.
Right.
So from the late 1890s into the late 1920s, thousands of silent films were made.
I'm supposed to remember that from my film history, from communication, because when you just said from the 1890s, I was like, I didn't even remember that film went back to then, but obviously it did.
Well, it was obviously, there's some contention about this, but we'll say, for the sake of argument, motion pictures were discovered by Thomas Edison.
Sure.
And there were people in France and other parts of the world that were also working on it. But, surprisingly, there is some very early stuff, some of which still survives. Yeah. But the vast majority of those early movies, they're all gone. Yeah. And the early movies were filmed on something called nitrate film. And nitrate is very volatile. It burns really well, and if you don't store it properly, it will disintegrate. So between vault fires and just pure disintegration, probably 85% of films prior to 1930 no longer exist. So a lot of history has been lost.
Well, and well beyond your college years, those 38 years ago,
yes,
you've studied and learned a lot more about, the history of film, but specifically of the silent films.
Yes.
Back in the day. So, I mean, because listening to this, I mean, when did you find out, for example, because that's just an interesting fact, like about 85% of those films are just lost because of, the disintegration, deterioration, or as you said, the nitrate film was so volatile, a lot of it just burned up and is gone. When did you learn that fact?
It came along fairly early on in those film history classes. You realize that, okay, someone had taken the time to preserve what was then recognized as, this is a classic.
Yeah.
Like something like Charlie Chaplin films or Harold Lloyd. A lot of the comedies were protected, but a lot of the everyday films, it's a lot like television and streaming services are today. A lot of this stuff was never meant to be a classic. It was just meant to fill time at a movie theater. But, after 100 years, those films, those simple, everyday films, give you a great insight into where we were in the early 20th century. Gives you a lot of ideas of just how people lived, how hard life was.
Yeah.
So to me, it was fascinating. It was a window into history that you could actually watch.
Yeah.
So
bringing history alive. If we sit in a classroom,
right,
we're studying history, and we have a history professor or a history teacher, depending on whether you're in high school or college or whatever, and they're telling us, history, and they're reading it in a book. You're talking about history coming alive.
Yes.
Yeah.
It is, and to me, that's the fascinating thing is that even though these are black and white images, you realize these are real people. They were living, breathing people, and to me, it was a fascination that, again, started in college and just kind of grew for a while before the days of videotape. I actually collected films for a while, and then when the video era started to dawn on us here, you could start to get some silent movies on videotape and things like that. But now in the digital age, it's a whole new ball game here, because now what I've discovered is we have the tools to take these very old films, and when you look at these old films, you always think of them as being very dusty and lines and very low quality. What you can do now is digitally and using artificial intelligence,
right.
The software now can help resurrect those images and clear them up and make them a lot more enjoyable for a modern audience.
Well, that kind of brings us to, I haven't really given you the opportunity yet, but I'm going to now. So what are you doing? And then how does that impact people who are listening now, read this story, and hear you talking about it? How does it impact them in terms of, hey, what does this mean to me? Because it's like almost, well, that's great that Joe's fascinated, but what are you doing, and how are you bringing it alive for us, whoever we are, me and my friends that maybe watch silent films? When you talk about resurrecting them, what are you doing?
Well, what I came across several groups on Facebook. For everybody that says that the internet is an evil thing, there are actually a few good things that happen periodically, and I was able to get involved with some groups on Facebook. And I befriended a man in Maine who was buying digital copies of films from archives around the world. And what he would do is then commission a new musical score to go with the silent film. And then he would release them, a limited release, but a release on DVD or Blu-ray. And I thought, that's a great idea that, so many, especially now, it used to be that it took a UCLA or a Warner Brothers or somebody like that to take an old film and be able to restore it and get it into people's hands.
Yeah.
Well, there's software and things now that have led to, for lack of a better term, a democratization of film restoration so that little guys like me can start to do that kind of work.
I was going to say, you're going to become a film mogul.
So,
Silent film mogul in 2023.
I need to get a tux or something, but for the red carpet.
There you go. I like it.
But about 4 or 5 years ago, I thought, I can do this. With the IT background, I thought maybe I can buy one of these films and take it through a restoration process and see where it takes us. So back in 2020, during the pandemic, I started working on my first film. It was one that we got from the Library of Congress in Washington.
Right.
It was from 1917. It starred a lady named Marie Doro. And Marie was...
How do you spell Doro?
D-O-R-O.
Okay, just making sure. So,
but
just like it sounds.
Marie was she was a stage actress and a beautiful lady, and also a very witty, intelligent woman as well. And she started off on the stage, and oddly enough, I think how she got into films was that her manager, who was managing her stage career, unfortunately was on the Lusitania.
Oh, wow.
And he died in the sinking of the Lusitania. So she was somewhat at loose ends, so she decided that she would try her luck with films.
Wow.
So along 1916 or so, she started making movies. So one of the ones that I got was one of her films, and went through the process of literally almost going through frame by frame of these films and looking to see, can you clean them up, can you do anything to improve them. And
now and when you started that one, your first film project, AI was not part of that then, or was
correct? It was not. It was
there was
in its
software, but
it was in its infancy at that point. Yeah. It's amazing to me how much it's evolved even in the 4 or 5 years since I started. But a lot of that was still manual, going through and erasing little bits of schmutz on individual frames of the film. And of course, people don't realize an hour's worth of film could be 60 or 80,000 frames.
Well, I was going to say, you and I have talked, and so for the listeners, the reason Joe's here now is because we've had a couple of conversations outside of this where it's like, this is great, will you come on and talk to the people about what you're doing? 80,000 frames, maybe an hour of film.
Maybe an hour of film, yes.
And that's like click, click, click,
yes.
frame in a frame.
So
oh my gosh!
and I always tell my wife if I didn't have OCD, I could never do this. But it's one of those things to where it's a labor of love, because otherwise it would drive a normal person crazy. But and the whole idea is you want your work to be invisible. So at the end of it, you want people to see that film and not realize that you've done anything to it. It's going to look perfectly natural.
Wow.
And that is always the challenge, is striking that balance between, okay, do you do something with this or will it cause it to look artificial or whatever? So it's as much art as science, but you go through this, and I've gotten to the point here now where it still takes me about 5 or 6 months to get through an entire feature and get it the way I want it.
Well, if you can, I think maybe it's easy for you to describe, but as you go frame by frame, now you're not using something with your hands to like wipe off a frame, or are you?
No. No, it's not physical, because when you get a copy of the film, it's all digital.
Right.
So it's a big computer file.
Right.
So
you're not looking at that nitrate reel thing. No. Okay.
No. So what you're using is, to start off with, it may be something that everyone's familiar with. Maybe it's Photoshop. So you go into Photoshop And there are tools in there that will allow you to identify, saying, okay, I know this is a piece of dirt. So what you can do is use the filters and different things to digitally remove that piece of dirt.
Perfect.
So it's a process like that. And, a lot of times you can go through and you could go 50 or 100 frames and they all look good. But then that's a good day. But then, there are times where you get to a stretch where things are in bad shape. So one of the movies that I worked on had a lot of deterioration to the nitrate film. And in some cases you have to say, there's nothing I can do about that. The image is gone.
Yeah.
So you strike that balance and say, can I help this? Can I not? And I think people who watch these films, they realize that you're not going to get a pristine, modern film. It's always going to look like an old film.
Well, again, we are used to seeing, like you said, some of those classics that were preserved. The Charlie Chaplins, like you said, you could see those funny lines. You
Sure.
can tell it's still a film.
Right.
And it's black and white, and it's silent, and it's almost, it brings its own humor just from looking at that. But you're cleaning that up in the restoration process, a good bit. Obviously not 100% pure.
Right.
It can't ever be that. But
and I think it's a revelation for people, people who don't know a lot about silent films. They thought that back in the day, that's what those films looked like. But they really they looked great at that time, and trying to get it to where you want people to experience it the way audiences may have done back in the 1910s or 1920s.
Yeah. Well, and that's funny because our mindset is that maybe we think that that's the way it looked. That's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that because we see it, we think, well, that's the way it looked then. No, it didn't. It looked like today. Well, obviously not as high quality, high definition as what we're seeing with all the digital world that we're living in, but it still looked like a good film,
right?
Nice and clean.
If anyone who's seen modern films that have been done in black and white, maybe not that high of quality because lenses have gotten better since then, but very, very good quality on these. These were shot in 35 millimeter, so it was good quality, and it's just trying to bring that to people again.
Well, I'm going to take you back for a minute. You were talking about Marie Doro in that film from 1917, which was your first project. So what was that like for you, going through that process and restoring that film the first time? And then today, obviously, I would guess you've gotten better at it, maybe more efficient at it,
yes.
I hope. So what was that process like, and how does it compare to when you do, and you've done, is it 5 now?
Yes.
Okay, so for the listeners, how's that first one compare to the most recent completed project for you in terms of time and process?
Well, one of the things that I think is interesting about the process that has actually stayed the same over the course of all the projects that I've done is when you're seeing this person, Marie Doro to start off with, or whoever it might be, Olive Thomas or Betty Compson or whoever it might be.
I was going to say, we're going to talk about how, because I know for you, and we're going to get back to this, Joe, I know for you that's how you, when I ask you the question, how do you select a film that you're going to restore, you go by picking a performer. But we'll get back to that. I want you to go through the process, how it stayed the same.
But I think one of the things that has stayed consistent is you develop a relationship with this person. Even though you're only interacting with them through the media of film, you really get an attachment to them, and you feel as if you know them in a way. Yeah. So that I find very satisfying. It really allows you to connect with history. But as far as the process goes, the process has gotten easier because the problems that you encounter tend to be the same.
Right.
There's dirt, there's bad splices, there's deterioration, whatever it might be. So you learn tricks over a period of time here to say, okay, I know how to fix this.
Yeah.
So if there's a really bad section here, I know that, okay, I can look at the frame before that, copy part of that frame, and marry it onto the one that's bad, and cover over the part that's
Nice.
damaged.
Tips and tricks on restoration of silent film from the nitrate days.
Yes. So, and the thing of it is as you go through these things, you realize that there was a person, a man or a woman, and a lot of times women were very well represented in early Hollywood. So, and women did a lot of the editing for films. So a lot of times when you're going there and you see the glue marks from where they glued two frames together or whatever it is, you realize, okay, that somebody actually worked on that 100 years ago. But it is interesting to kind of see beyond that and get that connection with the people who originally constructed the film.
Right. Well, yeah, again, for the listeners, and understanding the process, and you've talked about 5 or 6 months. So first project, do you remember what the time frame was from start to finish for you?
Oh, golly. I was learning everything.
Right.
So just even in procuring the film and everything took longer because I was new to the process. But the first one took a good 7 or 8 months to get through. And it all depends. That same film, I think I could probably do in 4 or 5 months now, but there's still a certain amount of work that you can't dial out of it. It's always going to be a certain amount of work. But
well, that's why I was curious, Joe, for me myself, but also for the listeners to understand the first project. Obviously, a learning process for you, but how much have you been able to shorten that process? But again, understanding, as you said, there are some things that have stayed consistent, the same, and which help also. But also, it's like this is the way it's going to be, and this is the amount of time that's going to take. That's not going to change.
I think unless there are big changes in computer technology,
right.
I try to stay on top of how software is evolving. But there are certain things, as I said, that so far they haven't changed and are going to take a certain amount of work to get through.
Okay, going back, first project again, Marie Doro, 1917. What was the name? I mean, I guess they named the films then.
The name of the film was Lost and Won, A-N-D, Lost and Won. So
one O-N-E or W-O-N. Lost and Won, like win.
Yes.
Right, okay.
So lose and win, but Lost and Won. It was a melodrama. Kind of a little bit of a My Fair Lady, bit of a storyline to where a businessman befriends a girl who is a newspaper girl, and he bets his friends that he can turn her into a lady, and so it turns out that. She goes through this process, and she ends up saving him from prison. So it's a clever little story, and it's amazing to me how much they can tell in an hour's worth of film. I think they'd be hard pressed to do that much story in a modern TV show or whatever it might be.
So I'm guessing right now, so the writers, directors, and producers of My Fair Lady saw that film and expanded on that idea. I don't know. I'm just making that up.
Quite possibly. And I'm sure that, they probably got the idea from, if it may have come from a stage play or a book. Even back then, they were cribbing ideas from books and things like that. They were not above that. But I think the thing of it is that the screenplay, of course, because it was a silent film, there was no dialogue. Right. So any dialogue, anything you see them saying, their mouths are moving, obviously. This was made up dialogue. So they would do it on the fly. So it was. interesting that they could still get as much information across to you and as deep a story, but with never uttering a word.
That says a lot. No pun intended,
yes.
But that says a lot. Maybe we would be better off to speak a little less ourselves, right? But that's an amazing piece of the story. Take us through, so, again, since then, you've done 4 others. You've completed 5 restorations.
Right.
And we're going to talk, before we finish up here, Joe, we're going to talk about the most recent one and try to help you spread the word, and maybe, I know there's a Kickstarter aspect. We're going to talk about that. But so, second one. First you did Marie Doro, and as I said, mentioned, you choose your projects by a performer. So,
true. There are, and I tend to be somewhat more enamored, I guess, with silent actresses.
I was going to say, it's all I heard when you rattled off a couple of names were like 3 other women. There's probably 4 besides Maria. How's it? Your wife, how's she with this, and you're becoming enamored with these silent film actresses?
I think she's okay with it. I think she realizes that it can't go beyond a video. So, the second lady I picked was an actress named Olive Thomas, and Olive Thomas was kind of a tragic character in that she was only in her mid-20s when she died of accidental poisoning. Another pretty lady, originally one of the Ziegfeld Follies girls, who got to be a big movie star. But found 2 of her movies, and these were in a Dutch archive. It not only took restoring the film, but also translating all the Dutch titles into English and replacing them.
Now, did you did 2 of Olive Thomas?
I did 2 of Olive Thomas.
Was that like second and third project?
Yes.
And so film titles.
The film title here, the first one was Out Yonder.
Yeah.
And the second one was The Fabulous Lady.
Oh, perfect. And obviously that would have been Olive.
Yes.
Nice.
And, again, these stories they're not comedies. They tend to be more melodramas.
Right.
And at the time, they may have appealed more to a female audience. I'm not sure how they would have pitched that.
Yeah.
But they were. They had a romantic aspect to it, and there was always a leading man who was involved at some point. But always a lot of fun, and not as stiff and as, theatrical as some people think that silent films are. Actually very natural in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
It's neat to see how acting styles evolved so quickly.
Right.
From the early days where it was very much like a stage presentation on film. They developed very quickly.
Very cool.
But on each of those, we were able to do Kickstarter campaigns.
Well, and hold that thought for a second, because I want to get to. So the 4th project was who was the actress? Obviously, it was an actress.
The 4th project was a movie called Lights Out.
Okay.
And Lights Out was from 1923. And the cool thing about that is that for decades, Lights Out was thought to be a lost film. People thought it didn't exist anymore. And it turned out that the Russians had it, but they had misfiled it. So they thought all those years that it was one movie when it was in fact Lights Out.
Wow.
So, and it was interesting that they had actually gifted that film under the wrong title to the Library of Congress. And as far as I can tell, the Library of Congress never looked at it because it was me who had to tell them, I don't think you have this film, I think you have Lights Out. At which point they called me back excitedly and said, you're right. And they said, this is great. We thought this was a lost film. So we were able to bring this film back, do a restoration on it, and we did a Kickstarter on it, but we also premiered that at a movie
you want to say theater?
Convention.
Oh, movie convention.
Movie convention.
Okay, wow, yeah.
In Columbus.
Nice. Columbus, Ohio.
In Columbus, Ohio, last May. And when that movie played to the audience in Columbus, that was the first audience, we think, to have seen it in nearly 100 years.
That's amazing.
So
I was going to say, you said
fun.
1923. That is 100 years old.
Yes.
And they thought it was gone. That's amazing. So then who was the actress that you...
The actress in that one was a lady named Ruth Stonehouse.
Right.
And Ruth was never a real big name. She was one of those middle-tier actresses who was, played a lot of roles, played in a lot of movies, actually did some directing.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
She was quite a jack of all trades, but she was a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah.
She plays a would-be con woman who turns out to have a heart of gold, of course. But it was fun.
That's neat. Well, that's going to bring us to the most recent project for you, your fifth one. I'm thinking I'm right.
Yes.
And which is, so A, who's the actress?
The actress is a lovely lady by the name of Betty Compson.
Okay.
And Betty Compson started acting in the mid-1910s.
Wow.
Was really an A-lister through the 1920s, and even went on to continue to be in films in the 1930s and I think even a few into the 1940s. Talkies,
yeah,
yes.
There you go.
So she was one of the few actresses that made that transition. Yeah. There were a lot of silent actors and actresses that, come 1929, they were out of a job. But Betty made the transition and was able to continue acting. But this one was it's a comedy from 1927, and it is called Say It with Diamonds.
Oh, yeah.
Easy.
We get an idea what that story might be.
Yes. And this is it's a great kind of a jazz age comedy, glamorous girls with their furs and things, sure. and it's a lot of fun. It's one of those classic comedies that revolves around misunderstanding and not telling the truth, and the trouble that you get into doing both of those things. So it's a lot of fun. Sophisticated comedy for 1927, I think.
Outstanding. That's the most recent.
That is the most recent.
For...
we just went live with a Kickstarter earlier in December.
Okay, well let's do this. So a lot of people, what is Kickstarter? Okay. So that people will understand. And this is, folks, this is what you want to hear. How do you get your hands on a Joe Harvat restored silent film, any one of the 5 that are done, and obviously you're going to continue to do this. Right. But so Kickstarter, what's a Kickstarter? So
Kickstarter is one of these, I guess the general term is called a crowdfunding site. So a person has an idea, has a project or something that they think would be a great product, a great project, in my case a great movie, but they don't necessarily have the funds to cover all the expenses of getting it done. So what they will do is go to Kickstarter and make a presentation on the site, and essentially they will share that presentation with their audience, the Kickstarter audience, for a certain number of days or whatever it is. And if people are interested in it, if they find that it's a good project and something they want to participate in, then they can make a pledge of money or whatever it might be to help make that project a reality. So that's what we have done is that we've gone out to Kickstarter and people will pledge money, and as a reward for helping us with the project, we will send them a finished DVD or Blu-ray And lately, we've even been doing digital downloads for people who want to do that. And usually what we have done is we'll get about maybe 200, 225 backers for each of the projects. But that far and away is enough for us to cover our expenses and to be able to send everyone out a DVD.
That is so. How do you say this for the listeners? And then I will also, when I publish this, I will put this in the printed version too, so people understand how they can look at the Kickstarter, and if they want to be a part of this with you, how they do that. So what do they do? Where do they go?
They can go to Kickstarter.com.
All right.
And usually there is a way to search through there to where you can search for silent movie or silent film, and it will bring you up all of the current projects that involve silent films. I think you may even be able to go out there and search for my name, Joe Harvat, and it will pull up my projects.
And it's Harvat, Harvat. For those of you that are going to search it, I'll say it again. So Joe, just like you think, Joe, but Harvat, Harvat,
Right.
And I'll put that in the printed version. And I know you sent me a link, so I'll include that with the story as well for
Okay.
people. So for you listening, you'll be able to grab the link from online on Loveland Beacon. Now, the same. So for the 4 previously completed projects, if somebody wants to take a look at Marie Doro in Lost and Won, you can get them a copy, right? They could reach out to you and
Right, they can reach out to me, and we can try to get them a copy that we have available. So,
very cool.
yeah.
Joe, before I let you go, is there anything else you want to tell the people? You know what? Actually, I have one quick question. How do you procure the film? Because you were talking about the procurement. I mean, what are the sources for you in terms of searching for these?
The biggest one has been the Library of Congress.
Right.
They have been very helpful in getting us digital copies. We do have to buy them, and in a lot of cases, some of them have been digitized. Others need to be digitized. So if they need to be digitized, that's part of the price that we have to pay.
Right.
So those tend to be more expensive.
Yeah.
But we've also worked with the Eye Film Museum in the Netherlands.
Wow.
They've been great. There are a number of other archives around the world, surprisingly all over the place. Not all of them want to work with you, though.
I understand.
Some of these archives tend to be a little stingy.
We'll say protective.
Protective of their assets. So,
Yeah. Very cool. Very
but
cool.
there are enough films out there to keep me busy for as long as I care to be known.
Well, so do we know? And we're going to wrap up here right now. But so do we know, Joe, who's the next actress?
The next actress, there's always a next actress.
Right.
So the next actress, there are actually 2 that are featured in the next film. One is Renee Adoree, Adoree.
Okay.
And Renee was a big star in the 20s who she was from France.
Oh.
So she always plays, it's to look at her and see the way she acts, you can kind of tell that she acts like a French girl might.
Okay.
So Renee is in there, and another lady, Barbara Lamar is her name. And Barbara was another big star of the early part of the 1920s.
I was going to say, that's actually a familiar name. I mean, she must have been an A-lister and gone.
Well, believe it or not, Hedy Lamarr, who came later,
Yeah.
Her name came from Barbara Lamar.
No kidding.
The person who suggested Hedy to change her name to Lamar was a big fan of Barbara's.
Perfect.
But so yes, and we think that one should be ready sometime mid-2024.
Excellent. Now, Joe, thank you so much for sharing the silent film story with us here on Loveland Beacon Talks today.
I hope everyone enjoyed it. It's a great labor of love for me and something that I enjoy greatly, and I'm happy to share it with people.
Joe, it was a treat. Thanks again.
Thank you.
That was Joe Harvat sharing a small piece of the silent film era with us. You can learn more and help support the restoration of these silent films by visiting Kickstarter.com and searching silent films and or Joe Harvat. I'm Chuck Gibson, saying thanks for listening here on Loveland Beacon. Loveland Beacon Talks is a presentation of Loveland Beacon Digital Media and Gibson Communications, LLC.